Myra sat quietly in her office, the kind of office that most people only dream about. It was on the top floor of a tall glass building, with wide windows that showed the busy city outside. Cars rushed like little streams of light, and tall buildings stood proudly under the sky. To the world, she was Myra, the successful CEO, the youngest woman to ever lead such a company. People respected her, admired her, and some even envied her. But none of them knew how heavy her heart really was. Behind the perfect image, Myra lived a life of silence and loneliness. 2 years ago, her life had taken a turn that no one could have imagined. She had been in a car accident on a rainy night. She remembered the sound of the brakes, the sharp crash, and then waking up in a hospital room. The doctors had told her something that broke her completely: she would never walk again. Since then, Myra had learned to move through the world in a wheelchair. She trained herself to look strong in front of others. She worked harder than before, built her company higher, and proved that she was still capable. But no matter how many awards or achievements she collected, something inside her remained empty. She had lost the part of life that made her laugh freely, that made her heart feel light. Her friends tried to cheer her up. They often said, "Myra, you're still young. You can't just spend your life working." But Myra only gave small smiles and changed the subject. She knew what they meant. She should try to meet someone who could care for her heart. But deep inside, she believed no one would see her beyond her chair. She had tried a few times. The men she met had kind words, but their eyes always showed hesitation or pity. And pity was the last thing Myra wanted. One evening, her closest friend, Sana, called her. "Listen," Sana said firmly, "I already set it up. You're going on a blind date. No excuses this time." Myra almost laughed. "A blind date? Sana, you know how these things end." "Not this time," Sana insisted. "Just go. Meet him once. What's the worst that could happen?" Myra sighed. She didn't want to argue anymore, and deep down, maybe a very small part of her wanted to believe her friend. So she agreed. The next evening, Myra dressed carefully. She chose a soft blue dress that matched her calm personality. She fixed her hair neatly and wore a pair of simple silver earrings. She didn't want to look like she was trying too hard, but she wanted to look presentable. When she wheeled herself in front of the mirror, she stared for a long time. Her reflection looked confident, but she knew how fragile she truly was inside. The restaurant Sana had chosen was quiet and peaceful. Warm lights glowed from the ceiling, and soft music played in the background. Myra arrived a little early and found her table near the corner. She placed her hands on the table, tapping her fingers slowly, waiting for the man who was supposed to meet her. She imagined what he might look like. Maybe he would be tall, dressed in a sharp suit, someone who smelled of expensive cologne and spoke with polished words. That was the type of man she had always met before. Men who looked perfect but whose hearts felt distant. The minutes passed, and Myra's eyes kept moving toward the entrance. At last, the door opened, and a man stepped in. But he wasn't what she had pictured at all. He was tall, yes, but instead of a suit, he wore a leather jacket that had clearly seen better days. His jeans were worn, and his shoes looked old. His hands carried the marks of hard work, rough, with small scars and faint stains of oil that could never be washed away. His hair was a little messy, and his face carried a shy uncertainty. Myra's heart sank. This must be a mistake, she thought. He didn't look like the type of man a blind date agency would send to meet a CEO. He looked more like someone who worked with machines, not someone who belonged in a fancy restaurant. The man scanned the room, looking a little lost, until his eyes landed on her. For a moment, he froze, then gave a small, genuine smile as if to say, "So it's you." Slowly, he walked toward her table. Myra straightened in her chair, unsure of what to expect. When he reached her, he spoke in a voice that was warm, though a little nervous. "You must be Myra." She nodded. "Yes. And you are?" "Armin," he said simply. His name was plain, but there was something steady in the way he said it. Myra studied him carefully, trying not to let her disappointment show. This wasn't the kind of man she imagined meeting. Yet, there was something different about him, something in his eyes that didn't carry pity or judgment. Instead, they carried curiosity, and maybe even kindness. She didn't know it yet, but this mistake, as she thought of it, was about to change the story of her life in ways she had never imagined. Armin stood beside the table, waiting for Myra to respond. For a moment, the two of them just looked at each other, the air filled with quiet tension. Myra, who was used to polished men with confident manners, didn't know what to think of this stranger in a worn leather jacket. Still, she gestured politely to the chair across from her. "Please, have a seat." Armin nodded and sat down, moving carefully as if afraid of making a mistake. He glanced at the menu, then back at her, his fingers nervously tapping the edge of the table. Myra noticed how uncomfortable he looked, but she didn't know whether to feel relieved or even more awkward. The waiter came to their table, and Myra ordered a simple salad. Armin, after a pause, asked for grilled chicken with rice. His voice was steady but soft, like someone not used to speaking in such a fine place. For a while, silence lingered. Myra sipped her water, wondering if she should start a conversation or simply wait for the evening to end. But then, Armin cleared his throat. "So," he began slowly, "you work in business?" Myra raised her eyebrows. "Yes. I'm a CEO." Armin blinked, then gave a small, surprised laugh. "Wow. That explains why you look so serious." Myra tilted her head, a little offended at first, but when she saw his smile, she realized he wasn't teasing her in a cruel way. He was simply being honest. It was the first time someone had spoken to her so casually in years. Most men tried too hard to impress her, speaking carefully as if they were in an interview. But Armin's words felt unpolished, even clumsy, and strangely refreshing. "And you?" she asked, her tone curious. "I'm a mechanic," he said simply. "I fix cars, bikes, anything with an engine, really." Myra blinked. A mechanic? She hadn't expected that. Most blind dates her friend arranged were with lawyers, doctors, or other businessmen. She wasn't sure what to say. Armin must have noticed her hesitation, because he quickly added, "I know it's not fancy. But I like it. I like using my hands, figuring out problems, getting things to run again." He paused and gave her a careful look. "It's honest work. I'm proud of it." There was something in his tone that caught her attention. It wasn't arrogance, it was quiet confidence. Myra found herself studying him differently now. His rough hands, his simple clothes, suddenly, they made sense. The food arrived, and for a few moments, they ate in silence. Myra took small bites of her salad, while Armin ate with an appetite that made her smile without realizing it. "You know," Armin said between bites, "I didn't think I'd end up here tonight. My cousin signed me up for this thing." Said I should try something new. I almost didn't come. Myra raised an eyebrow. So you didn't want to be here? He shook his head quickly. No, no, it's not like that. I mean, I just thought it was a bad idea. People like me don't usually sit in restaurants like this. But then I saw you, and I thought, maybe it's not such a bad idea after all. His honesty surprised her. Myra felt a warmth in her chest, though she tried to hide it behind a calm expression. Still, doubts crept in. She leaned back slightly, her fingers brushing the rim of her glass. You don't think it's strange? A mechanic on a blind date with a CEO. Armin met her gaze directly, his eyes steady. It only feels strange if we make it strange. The words were simple, but they touched something inside her. For so long, Myra had believed her chair, her position, her title, everything built a wall between her and others. Yet here was a man who didn't seem bothered by any of it. As the evening went on, their conversation began to flow more easily. Armin told her stories about the cars he had fixed, the long hours in his small workshop, and the funny moments with customers. Myra found herself listening closely, even laughing once when he described an old man who brought his car in for repairs every week just to have someone to talk to. Myra, in turn, shared small pieces of her own life. She didn't talk about the accident yet, that part of her story still felt too fragile. But she spoke about the pressure of leading a company, the loneliness of success, and the way people often treated her more like a symbol than a person. Armin listened carefully, nodding at the right times, not offering fake advice, just letting her speak. It was rare, Myra realized, to have someone truly listen to her without expecting something in return. By the time dessert was offered, Myra was surprised to see that 2 hours had passed. The awkward silence that had filled the beginning of their meeting was gone. Instead, she felt something lighter, something almost like ease. When they finally left the restaurant, Myra wheeled herself toward the door while Armin walked beside her. He didn't rush ahead or try to push her chair like some people did without asking. He simply walked at her pace, quietly matching her steps. That small gesture touched her more than she expected. Outside, the cool night air brushed against them. Myra looked at him and gave a small smile. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly. Armin smiled back. "Thank you for not walking out when you saw me." Myra chuckled, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. "I thought about it," she admitted honestly. "And I thought about turning back before even coming in," he replied. They both laughed, and in that laughter, something unspoken formed between them. Neither of them knew what the future would hold, but for the first time in years, Myra felt a spark of something she had almost forgotten: hope. The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of Myra's office, spreading a warm glow across the neat wooden desk. Normally, mornings meant endless files, meetings, and emails. But today, something felt different. Myra sat quietly with her coffee, her thoughts drifting back to the previous night. She remembered Armin's awkward smile, his rough but kind hands, the way he had matched his steps with the pace of her wheelchair. She remembered how he had listened, not with pity, not with cold politeness, but with real interest. For the first time in years, she had laughed, not out of politeness, but because she truly felt amused. It unsettled her. She had not expected the blind date to mean anything. She had almost refused to go. And yet, Armin's face kept slipping into her thoughts like a quiet song she couldn't stop hearing. Her phone buzzed on the desk, snapping her back to reality. It was a message from Sana. "Sana, well. How was the blind date? Tell me everything. Myra hesitated, then typed slowly. It wasn't what I expected. But, it wasn't bad. Almost instantly, Sana replied, not bad. That's the best review you've given anyone in years. Should I tell him to call you? Myra stared at the screen for a long time. She wasn't sure if she wanted to take it further. A mechanic and a CEO, it sounded like the beginning of a story people would laugh at. Still, something in her heart whispered, why not? She typed one word, okay. That evening, when Myra's phone rang, her chest tightened. She glanced at the screen. It was an unfamiliar number. She almost let it ring out, but her hand moved on its own, picking up the call. Hello. Hi. It's Armin. I hope I'm not disturbing you. His voice sounded unsure, as if he expected her to hang up at any moment. Myra smiled softly, though he couldn't see it. No, you're not disturbing me. How are you? I'm good. Just finished at the workshop. Thought I'd check if, maybe you'd like to have coffee sometime. Not fancy. Just a small cafe near my place. Myra paused. She had never been invited to a small cafe by someone like him. Usually, her dates were in luxury restaurants, with men who wanted to show off their wealth. But somehow, the idea of sitting in a quiet corner of a simple cafe felt comforting. All right, she said. Coffee sounds nice. 2 days later, Myra found herself outside a modest cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. The air smelled of fresh bread and roasted beans. Armin was already there, waiting near the door, his jacket folded over his arm. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that looked completely genuine. Inside, the cafe was cozy, with wooden tables and shelves filled with books. They chose a corner table, and Armin ordered 2 cups of coffee and a plate of pastries. You'll like these, he said. The baker here makes them fresh every morning. Myra watched him as he spoke, noticing how comfortable he seemed in this place. It was different from the restaurant here, he wasn't nervous. He belonged. And surprisingly, she didn't feel out of place either. As they sipped their coffee, their conversation grew deeper. Armin spoke about his childhood, growing up in a small town, learning to fix cars with his father. He laughed as he told her how he once dismantled an old motorbike just to see how it worked, only to fail at putting it back together. His father had laughed instead of scolding him, teaching him that mistakes were just part of learning. Myra listened closely, drawn to the warmth in his stories. For so long, she had been surrounded by people who spoke only about success, business, or competition. Armin's stories were simple, but they carried a richness that touched her. When it was her turn, Myra hesitated. Then, for the first time in years, she allowed herself to speak about her accident. I wasn't always in a wheelchair, she began softly, her fingers brushing the rim of her cup. 2 years ago, I had an accident. Since then, things have been different. Armin didn't interrupt. He didn't look shocked or uncomfortable. He just nodded, waiting for her to continue. I thought my life ended that night. I kept working, kept building my company, but inside, I stopped living. I thought no one would ever look at me the same way again. Silence hung between them for a moment, and Myra's chest tightened, afraid she had said too much. But then Armin spoke, his voice steady. You know what I fix the most in my workshop? Cars people think are useless. They look broken, too damaged to work again. But with time and patience, they run again. Sometimes even better than before. Myra's eyes widened. His words weren't just about cars, and she knew it. He was speaking about her. For the first time, tears touched the corners of her eyes, not from pain, but from the quiet comfort his words gave her. She turned her gaze away, blinking quickly, not wanting him to see. Armin didn't push her. He simply broke a piece of pastry, placed it on her plate, and said gently, "Try this. It's sweet, but not too much. Just right." Myra picked it up slowly and took a bite. The taste was warm, buttery, and soft. She couldn't help but smile. For years, Myra had lived behind walls she had built around her heart. But with Armin, those walls were beginning to crack, not with grand gestures, not with fancy words, but with simple kindness. As they left the cafe, Armin walked beside her again, steady and quiet. Myra realized something that startled her. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about what she had lost. She was thinking about what she might still find. The days that followed were different for Myra. She still worked the same long hours, still sat in meetings where people waited for her decisions, but something inside her had changed. Her evenings were no longer filled with just silence and work. She now carried small memories: Armin's smile, his words about broken cars, the warmth of coffee shared in a tiny cafe. Sana noticed it immediately. "You're glowing," she teased during lunch one afternoon. "Who is he?" Myra rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. "It's nothing like that." "Nothing?" Sana leaned closer. "You actually laughed yesterday. I haven't seen you laugh in 2 years. Don't try to tell me it's nothing." Myra shook her head, but deep down, she knew her friend was right. Something was happening, something she couldn't explain yet. Later that week, Armin called her again. This time, there was no hesitation in his voice. "There's a park near my workshop," he said. "Quiet place. Trees, flowers, a small lake. Would you like to go there tomorrow evening?" Myra hesitated. Parks reminded her of her old life: jogging in the morning, running freely, climbing stairs without thinking. The thought of returning to such a place scared her. But when she heard the hope in Armin's voice, she couldn't bring herself to say no. "All right," she agreed softly. The next evening, the park was filled with gentle evening light. Children ran along the paths, couples sat on benches, and the sound of birds floated through the air. Myra wheeled herself beside Armin, who walked slowly to match her pace as always. "It's been years since I came to a park," she admitted. Armin glanced at her. "Do you regret it?" Myra shook her head. "No. Just, it feels strange. Like I don't belong here anymore." "You belong wherever you want to," Armin said simply. They stopped near the lake. The water shimmered, reflecting the fading sun. Myra watched quietly, her hands resting on her lap. For a while, they didn't speak. But the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful, like the soft pause between heartbeats. Armin suddenly picked up a small stone from the ground and tossed it into the water. It skipped once before sinking. He grinned. "Still not good at that." Myra chuckled, shaking her head. "You need to throw it flatter." "You show me then," he teased. She looked at him, then at her hands, and gave a small laugh. "That part of me doesn't work like it used to." Armin's smile faded, realizing his careless joke. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. But Myra surprised herself by smiling. "It's all right. You didn't mean it that way. For once, she didn't feel broken when she said those words. She felt human. Over the next few weeks, they met often. Sometimes in cafes, sometimes at the park, sometimes near his workshop where the smell of engine oil mixed with fresh tea from a street vendor. Myra found herself looking forward to these moments more than she ever admitted. But as her heart opened slowly, her mind began to resist. One evening, after leaving Armin's workshop, Myra returned home and sat by her window, lost in thought. This is foolish, she told herself. A CEO and a mechanic, what future could we possibly have? She thought about the world she lived in, full of business dinners, charity events, and formal meetings. Armin didn't belong there. And maybe, she didn't belong in his world either. She feared the gap between them would grow, that their differences would crush the fragile comfort she had begun to feel. The next day at the office, her doubts grew heavier. During a meeting, one of her board members casually mentioned a news article. They say you were seen with someone. People are curious, Myra. Is it true? Myra kept her face calm, but her heart raced. She hated how easily people watched her life, ready to turn her personal moments into gossip. She simply replied, "It's nothing important," and ended the discussion quickly. But later, as she sat alone in her office, those words echoed inside her. Nothing important. She had said it to protect herself, but deep inside, she wondered if she was also protecting her heart by pushing Armin away. That evening, Armin called again. "Want to grab coffee?" he asked cheerfully. Myra hesitated, staring at the city lights outside her window. I'm busy tonight." "Oh," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "That's fine. Maybe another time." They hung up, but Myra sat in silence, her chest aching. She knew she wasn't busy. She was simply afraid. Afraid of what others would say, afraid of what it might mean if she let herself truly fall for him. For 2 days, she avoided his calls. Each time her phone lit up with his name, she stared at it until it stopped ringing. On the third evening, Armin came to see her. He stood outside her office building, waiting as she exited. She was surprised, almost startled, to see him there. "Why are you here?" she asked quietly. Armin looked at her with steady eyes. "Because you stopped answering." "Did I do something wrong?" Myra opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't know what to say. Finally, she whispered, "It's not you. It's me. This doesn't make sense. You and me, we're too different." For a long moment, Armin didn't respond. Then, with calm determination, he said, "Maybe we are different. But does that mean we can't be something good together?" Myra's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, but fear still wrapped around her heart like chains. "I don't know," she whispered. Armin didn't push further. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then think about it. I'll wait for your answer." With that, he walked away, leaving Myra standing there, her heart torn between fear and the strange new hope he had brought into her life. Myra couldn't sleep that night. She lay in her quiet apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying Armin's words again and again. "Maybe we are different. But does that mean we can't be something good together?" His voice, calm yet firm, echoed in her mind. She wanted to believe him. But every time she thought about her world, the board meetings, the elegant dinners, the judgmental eyes of society, she felt a wave of doubt. Would Armin really fit into that world? Or would she only end up hurting him and herself? The next morning, she pushed herself into work, trying to bury the thoughts. Her company was preparing for a major event, a charity gala where the city's most powerful people would gather. She had no time to think about emotions. She told herself she needed to focus on her role, her responsibilities. But no matter how much she tried, Armin's absence weighed on her. His calls had stopped. His messages had stopped. The silence felt heavy, almost unbearable. 3 days later, fate made its own plan. Myra's car, the one she used with a special modification for her wheelchair, broke down on her way home. The driver who usually accompanied her was off duty, and for once, she had decided to handle the short drive herself. She pulled to the side of the road, frustration building as the engine sputtered and died. She sat there, helpless, as cars passed by without slowing. Just when she was about to call a service, a familiar sound caught her ears, the rumble of a motorbike pulling over. She looked up, and her heart skipped. Armin. He removed his helmet, his hair messy from the ride, his eyes widening when he recognized her. Myra? What are you doing here? My car broke down, she admitted, trying to sound calm though embarrassment burned inside her. I was about to call someone. Armin gave a half smile. You don't need to. I'm someone. Without another word, he leaned down to check under the hood. His hands moved quickly, confident and skilled, as though the car was simply another puzzle waiting to be solved. Myra watched him, remembering the pride in his voice when he had once said he liked fixing things, giving them life again. Within 20 minutes, the engine roared back to life. Armin wiped his hands on a cloth he carried in his jacket and turned to her. It'll run fine now. Just needs a proper service later. Myra felt a strange warmth spread in her chest. Thank you, she said softly. Armin looked at her, his expression unreadable. You didn't answer my calls. I thought maybe you didn't want to see me anymore. Myra's throat tightened. She wanted to explain, to tell him about her fears, but the words got stuck. Finally, she whispered, I was scared. Scared of me? No, she shook her head quickly. Scared of what this could mean. Scared of people judging us. Scared of letting someone in. Armin's eyes softened. He didn't laugh at her fears, nor did he dismiss them. He simply nodded. Fear is normal. But you can't let it control you. Sometimes, you just have to trust. The sincerity in his voice pierced through her defenses. For so long, she had been strong, building walls around her heart to protect herself. But standing there with Armin, she wondered if it was time to let one of those walls fall. That weekend, Myra made a decision. The charity gala was approaching, and she knew the room would be filled with gossip, with sharp eyes measuring her every move. It was the perfect chance to test herself and Armin. If she truly wanted to know whether their worlds could meet, she had to take the risk. She called him. Her hands trembled as she held the phone. Armin, are you free this Saturday night? There was a pause. Yes, why? I want you to come with me. To an event. It's important. But only if you're comfortable. Another pause, then his steady voice, if you want me there, I'll be there. Saturday arrived. Myra wore an elegant black gown, simple yet graceful. She wheeled herself into the grand hall, where glittering chandeliers hung from the ceiling and guests in fine clothes filled the space. Whispers followed her as always, but she had learned to ignore them. Then Armin entered. He wore a plain suit, nothing expensive, but neat and clean. He looked slightly uncomfortable among the polished crowd, but when his eyes found Myra, he relaxed. He walked straight to her, and in that moment, she felt a wave of courage. Throughout the evening, she introduced him to people. Some smiled politely, others raised their eyebrows, but Armin remained calm. He didn't try to act like someone he wasn't. He shook hands, answered questions honestly, and stayed close to Myra, his presence steady and grounding. At one point, when Myra rolled toward the refreshment table, she overheard two women whispering. A CEO with a mechanic? How strange. She must be lonely to bring him here. The words stung, but before Myra could react, Armin leaned down and said quietly, "Ignore them. They don't know you. They don't know us." His calmness, his unshaken confidence, soothed her. For the first time at such an event, Myra didn't feel alone. That night, as he walked her to her car, Myra turned to him. "Do you regret coming?" Armin smiled. "Not for a second. I told you before, we only make it strange if we let it be strange." Myra's eyes glistened. In that moment, she realized something important. The fear was still there, but it no longer felt stronger than the hope he had given her. For the first time, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could be something good together. The gala had ended, but its echoes remained in Myra's mind. For days afterward, she replayed the evening. She remembered the way Armin had stood beside her, unshaken by whispers and curious stares. He had been himself, without pretension, and that had given her strength. For the first time in years, Myra felt lighter. She found herself smiling more at work, her voice softer in meetings, her evenings warmer with thoughts of Armin. Sana noticed the change and teased her endlessly, but Myra didn't mind. Yet life, as always, had its way of testing happiness. One afternoon, Myra received an unexpected email. It was from an old acquaintance, Rian, a man she had once known before her accident. Rian was from a wealthy family, polished and ambitious, the kind of man her board members would approve of instantly. The email was short: "I'll be attending your company's upcoming investor dinner. Looking forward to reconnecting." Myra felt her chest tighten. She hadn't seen him in years, not since the accident. She remembered how his attention had faded quickly when her life changed. She wasn't bitter, but she hadn't forgotten either. That evening, she told Armin about it while they sat in the park. The air was cool, and the lake rippled gently under the moonlight. "An old friend is coming to the dinner," Myra said quietly. "Rian. We used to, well, he used to show interest in me, before everything changed." Armin listened carefully, his face calm. "And how do you feel about that?" "I don't know," Myra admitted. "Part of me feels nervous. People like him always judge. I worry he'll see you and think," she stopped, ashamed of her own words. "Think I don't belong." Armin finished gently. Myra lowered her gaze. "Yes." There was silence for a moment, then Armin placed a hand on the bench, close to hers. "Myra, people will always judge. But their judgment doesn't decide our worth. The question is, what do you want? Do you want me there with you?" Her eyes lifted to meet his. Slowly, she nodded. "Yes. I want you there." "Then that's all that matters," he said simply. The investor dinner arrived a week later. The hall was elegant, filled with the soft hum of conversation and the clink of glasses. Myra wore a graceful maroon dress, her hair neatly tied, her presence commanding as always. Armin, beside her in his modest suit, looked slightly out of place, but he carried himself with quiet dignity. As they greeted investors, Myra spotted Rian across the room. He approached with his usual polished smile. "Myra," he said warmly, "it's been a long time." "Yes," Myra replied politely. "This is Armin." Rian shook Armin's hand with a glance that lingered just a moment too long, his smile tight. "A mechanic, I hear." "Yes," Armin answered calmly. "That's me." Rian's brows lifted slightly, as though the word didn't belong in the setting. He turned back to Myra, speaking of old times, of business ventures, of opportunities. Myra listened politely, but inside, she felt a flicker of irritation. She realized Rian wasn't really seeing her at all, he was only seeing the CEO, the symbol. At one point, when Armin excused himself to get them drinks, Rian leaned closer. "Myra, you deserve someone who understands your world. Someone who can walk beside you in these circles. Don't settle for less." Myra's eyes hardened. She had once valued his opinion, but tonight, his words felt shallow. She thought of Armin, his steady presence, his honesty, the way he had given her laughter again. "I'm not settling, Rian," she said firmly. "I'm choosing." Rian blinked, surprised. Before he could respond, Armin returned, placing a glass of water gently in front of her. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to claim attention. He simply stayed by her side, as he always did. After the dinner, as they stepped outside into the night, Myra felt an unexpected wave of relief. She turned to Armin. "Do you know what I realized tonight?" she asked softly. "What?" he asked, his eyes curious. "That you see me. Not the CEO, not the wheelchair, not the image everyone else stares at. Just me." Armin's lips curved into a small smile. "Isn't that the point?" Her heart swelled. For years, she had longed for exactly that, to be seen, simply and fully. But as happiness warmed her, another challenge soon arrived. The next morning, the media picked up whispers from the dinner. Headlines appeared online: "CEO seen with mechanic at elite event, unusual pair raises eyebrows." Myra's assistant brought the news to her office nervously. "I thought you should know before the board calls a meeting." Myra read the words, her chest tightening. She had always known her personal life would attract attention, but seeing it in print felt harsher than she expected. The board meeting that followed was tense. Some members expressed concern. "Myra, appearances matter. Investors might not take kindly to this kind of publicity." Myra listened quietly, her mind torn. Part of her wanted to defend Armin fiercely, but another part feared risking the company she had worked so hard to build. That evening, she sat with Armin in the small cafe where they had first shared coffee. The warmth of the pastries and the smell of roasted beans surrounded them, but Myra's mood was heavy. "They're talking about us," she admitted. "The media, the board. They think you're not right for me." Armin leaned back, his gaze steady. "And what do you think?" Myra swallowed hard. "I think I'm afraid. Afraid of losing everything I built. But also afraid of losing you." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Armin reached across the table, his hand resting close to hers. "Myra, I can't promise the world will understand us. But I can promise you this: I won't walk away, unless you ask me to. The choice is yours." Myra's heart ached. The choice, yes, it was hers. But choices had consequences. And soon, she would have to decide whether to follow fear, or to follow her heart. Myra sat quietly in her office, the city lights glowing like distant stars beyond the windows. The events of the past weeks, the cafe meetings, the park walks, the charity gala, and the whispers of judgment spun in her mind. She had spent years building walls around her heart, believing that love was a luxury she could no longer afford. Yet, Armin had shown her something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She remembered the warmth in his eyes, the steady way he had always matched his pace to hers, the calm reassurance that had made her laugh and feel alive again. And now, as she stared at the skyline, she realized she had a choice. One choice that would change everything. The phone rang, breaking her thoughts. It was Armin. She hesitated, then answered. "Hi," he said softly. "I was thinking, maybe we could meet tonight? Just the two of us. No distractions." Myra smiled faintly. "All right. I'll meet you at the park, near the lake." By the time she arrived, the sun had begun to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. Armin was already there, waiting by the water, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. He turned when he saw her and gave the small, genuine smile she had come to cherish. "Myra," he said gently, "are you ready?" She nodded, though her heart raced with a mixture of fear and excitement. "I think I am." They walked slowly along the path beside the lake, the water reflecting the colors of the sky. For a moment, neither spoke, letting the quiet of the evening surround them. Then Myra broke the silence. "Armin," she began, her voice soft, "these past weeks, you've made me feel something I thought I would never feel again. You've made me laugh, feel safe, and see myself differently." Armin stopped and turned toward her. "Myra, you don't have to say anything else. I just want you to be honest with yourself." She took a deep breath. "I'm scared. Scared of what people will think, scared of losing what I built, scared of being vulnerable again. But I also know I don't want to lose you. I've realized I don't want to let fear decide my life anymore." Armin stepped closer, his eyes steady and kind. "Myra, we can face the world together. It won't always be easy, but I promise, I'll be with you every step of the way." Tears welled in Myra's eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. She had spent so long trying to control everything, guarding herself against every possible hurt, that she had forgotten how to trust. Now, standing there with Armin, she understood that trust wasn't weakness, it was courage. Slowly, she reached out her hand. Armin took it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining naturally. They sat by the edge of the lake, talking quietly as the sky darkened into a deep blue. Myra shared small stories from her childhood, moments she had never told anyone, and Armin listened, laughing at the funny parts and nodding at the serious ones. For the first time, Myra didn't feel the weight of her title or her past. She was just herself, and that was enough. "I never expected to smile like this again," Myra admitted softly. "You deserve it," Armin said, looking into her eyes. "You've worked hard, fought hard, and still stayed true to yourself. And now, you don't have to do it alone." Her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She realized that happiness wasn't about perfection or public approval, it was about honesty, connection, and courage. And she had found all three in Armin. In the following weeks, Myra and Armin continued to meet, their bond growing stronger. They faced challenges, gossip, raised eyebrows, and occasional doubts, but they faced them together, their trust and affection acting as a shield. Myra's board and friends slowly began to accept Armin, seeing how his honesty and kindness had transformed her. One evening, as they sat in the park, watching the stars reflect in the lake, Myra leaned her head on Armin's shoulder. "I'm glad I didn't let fear win," she whispered. "Neither am I," he replied, wrapping an arm around her. "We've come a long way. And we'll keep moving forward, together." Myra closed her eyes, feeling safe, seen, and truly alive for the first time in years. The world outside could judge, speculate, or doubt, but here, in this moment, with Armin by her side, she had found a happiness she had thought was lost forever. For Myra, the journey wasn't just about love. It was about trust, courage, and the willingness to open her heart despite the fear. And in Armin, she had found a partner who not only accepted her past but celebrated her strength. As the night settled over the city, Myra smiled a real, unguarded smile and realized that life, with all its challenges, could still surprise her in the most beautiful ways. For the first time in a long time, she believed that the future could be bright, full of laughter, hope, and the kind of love that made even the heaviest heart feel light. And in that quiet moment by the lake, Myra knew one thing for certain: she would never let fear decide her happiness again.